Hi everyone! Welcome back to another episode of Mental Health and the Brain and another episode in the mini-series on trauma. I really want to get into this topic in more detail. Like I said, trauma is often associated with horrific events like a car accident, like war, like physical abuse. But as I shared in the first video, this can also occur with seemingly smaller things. So trauma is not just reserved for those kinds of large-scale horrible events you can think of. It can also appear in other situations. You can also experience emotional or psychological abuse, and that will result in trauma. And this is a topic that I want to focus on today. As you may have guessed by its name, psychological abuse is when a person or more than one person messes with your mind, manipulates you, messes with your psychological state, basically tries to or actively uses your thoughts against you. For example, it could be somebody actively trying to or controlling you, shaming you, gaslighting, teasing, name-calling, shouting, not respecting your boundaries, blackmailing or emotional blackmail. Basically, all of these things that you might have either have heard of before or you might even have experienced. And I'm not going to say that you considered it normal, but you might not think twice about it because these are behaviors that people have often. But all of this is actually considered emotional or psychological abuse, especially when it's done repetitively. So of course, if somebody does something to you once, maybe it's no big deal, they might not do it again, maybe they didn't intend it, and so on. But if somebody keeps on doing this to you, or a group of people keep on using these behaviors with you, then it definitely gets into the territory of abuse. And like I said, this can bring and create trauma. If you've experienced any of this yourself, then you will know exactly what I'm talking about. But the problem with this type of abuse is that because it's kind of invisible, difficult to see, unlike physical abuse, and it's also really difficult to explain. So it might be something that's happened to you, but you weren't fully aware that that was the label, that was the name. And that's totally okay because it's not something that we talk about much. There is information out there, but it's not easy to find. You have to know what you're looking for. So it's totally normal if you're suddenly having an aha moment now. And the worst part is that you often believe that this type of behavior is normal because it's something that you've become really accustomed to. I just want to say that it's also quite normal for victims of abuse not to realize that they are actually victims. It's quite usual that they internalize this behavior and kind of viewed it as normal. And that's why no matter the type of abuse, it's very hard for them to identify that this is what happened to them. As I was explaining, emotional abuse is mostly to do with manipulation, tactics related with the mind, with how it makes you feel, with how people basically try to manipulate you or use certain situations or things against you to, basically control the way you behave, control your mind, control your outcomes, right? So with that in mind, and also thinking about what I just said, that this behavior is familiar to you, you reach a point where you don't know whether it's right or whether it's wrong. Probably in your instincts, your gut is telling you this is wrong, it doesn't feel right. But after a while, you also develop a certain kind of coping mechanism. So you either learn to shut down your intuition or your inner voice, or to just ignore it, just get on with it. You know, somebody's shouting at you again, you're just like, okay, just gonna get on with it, whatever, right? So, and this is part of the other person's power over you actually, is that you have reached a point, or they helped you reach a point where you perceive their behavior as somehow normal, or you're so accustomed to what they're doing to you that you either comply with what they want from you, that they're trying to coerce from you, or you kind of just let it happen and continue with life. And so that's also part of this psychological and emotional abuse. The other person gains control over you through these methods. And I just want to add another thing here, just to say, because right now the way I'm speaking makes it sound as if a person or people are actively trying to control you. So it's almost as if they knew what they were doing and were doing it intentionally. And I would also say that there are situations in which people are using these kinds of tactics or behaving with you in this kind of way, and they're not necessarily aware that they're doing it. But also, just to realize that you don't have to have somebody, let's say, actively engaging in these behaviors with you to be a victim of emotional abuse and to experience this trauma or to have some sort of emotional trauma. On the other hand, some people are fully aware of what they're doing. They're definitely aware of their toxic behaviors. I mean, I think you might have met some of these people in your lifetime. That being said, no matter the type of person and no matter the situation, whether they're doing it on purpose or not, this kind of behavior is, first of all, very problematic, and second of all, deeply traumatic, especially if it's happening to you, like I said, on a regular basis. And it also has implications on how you feel, how you act, how you behave, and how you interact with others as well. So if you think back to the video I made about the reptilian brain, you will know that this part of your brain is concerned with your survival, and it's, the fight, flight or freeze modes. So it's actively thinking and perceiving and assessing like all the different dangers that are around you and the different types of situations you're in that it perceives as dangerous. This means that in response to psychological and emotional abuse, your brain is actually emitting these danger signals because it knows that there's a threat. It feels a threat. Even though somebody's not physically attacking you, you are feeling at some point attacked. Something is happening to you that you don't like. So your brain is now sending out all the stress signals, and it's like, we have to get out of here, protect yourself, and it activates this fight or flight mode. As you'll know from another video, this has a huge impact, not just on your mind, of course, but on your body as it prepares for you to flee. So if you're experiencing this on a regular basis, again, you have to imagine that every time you're experiencing the abusive situation, your brain is activating, it's sending the signals. And then, like I said in the very first video on trauma, this response to the situation gets hot-wired in your brain. So it could be that if you're, used to some person always shouting at you or a person always criticizing you, physically, when the person enters the room, your body tenses, you're like, ready for the criticism, or, it's coming. And then, so you're even before that person's opened their mouth, you're already physically living the experience that you dislike. So this is where it gets more complicated. I've already kind of explained the fact that the emotional trauma, the action that somebody is taking against you that makes you feel bad, which is why it's called emotional or psychological abuse, is already having a physical chemical reaction in your body. And on top of that, you have to imagine that you are going to learn over time subconsciously that leaving the house is a bad thing to do because it makes your partner unhappy. So it's not a desirable thing to do. And ultimately, this means that in order to protect you, your brain is going to create a pathway that says, in order to make my partner happy or somebody else happy, I have to sacrifice what I want to keep the peace, to avoid any conflict, and that's it. Before you know it, you have ingrained and learned a behavior that doing what you want is a bad thing. And this is where it starts to become very damaging, because what is essentially a coping mechanism or a way of protecting you becomes, again, to use the term, hot-wired into your brain, and you're just doing it on autopilot. But it's really bad for you in this moment because it means that you're actually engaging in a behavior that's bad for you, that causes you pain, that makes you unhappy, because you're actually sacrificing what you want. And at some point, if you've done it for so long, you don't even realizing you're doing it anymore. You don't even realize that you're making this active choice. And so this is what can make you unhappy. So now, if you think about it, not only do you have the action of the emotional abuse, the feelings, the physical reaction of that abuse, the fear of it happening, and then you have the ingrained behavior that you've learned that's actually making you unhappy, but you don't know why. All of these things, it seems small, but actually has a really deep impact on who we are and how we behave in the world and as adults, right? You might have experienced this kind of emotional or psychological abuse. Like I said, when it's a repetitive behavior. Think of people such as in your family. It could have been a parent, it could have been a sibling, it could have been an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent. And by the way, for the record, I'm not saying that all families abuse each other. I'm just saying these are the people that you spend the most time with, so it makes sense that that might have been where you could have experienced. But it could also be school, it could also be work, to be honest. It could be a partner. A lot of people, if you kind of read about these kind of stories, a lot of people are in abusive relationships, and that doesn't have to be just physical abuse. That can also be, you know, a boyfriend manipulating a girlfriend or vice versa. All of this counts, right? So I think for me, there are two important messages I want to deliver today. First of all is that emotional and psychological abuse is a thing. It is real. It is possible to experience trauma from this type of abuse. It's not easy to see, it's not easy to recognize, but it is something that happens. So first of all, just to really kind of get the understanding of what it is, what it means, and as I described the impact of that, what the trauma looks like. What does the trauma response look like to emotional abuse? How does this manifest in your life? The second most important message I want to deliver is that this kind of behavior is not normal. If somebody is constantly gaslighting you, if somebody is trying to control you, if somebody is trying to guilt you, shame you, manipulate you into certain situations, it's not normal. And the first step is really just to develop this awareness of the way that somebody is interacting with you and realizing that it's not healthy and it's not how somebody should be interacting with you. I think this is the biggest step that we can take to really free ourselves from this behavior, because by realizing that the way somebody is treating you isn't right, it helps you to finally break out of the pattern. At least in my experience, it does. And I know it can be really difficult, so I'm not saying that overnight you're going to have an epiphany, but I definitely think that realization is the first step. So be kind to yourself by recognizing and acknowledging what you've gone through. If you do identify with this, you know, really take the time to sit with it, take the time to think about it. Don't feel bad, you know, don't guilt or shame yourself after that for having been through this experience. Like I said, it's really difficult to identify, so it's completely normal if you weren't aware of it. And then once you've made it past that step, I would say really start to think about how this might have impacted you. For example, start to think about how you respond to that person's emotional abuse, because of course it's a pattern, right? Both people are stuck in a pattern. So, you know, if the person always says to you, you always leave me alone and you never include me, does it induce fear? Does it induce anxiety? Does it mean that you just stop going out completely? Does it mean you just don't tell them what you're doing? You know, think about what behavior is happening in you, because that's the second part, I think, to really breaking free of the pattern, is being able to realize, oh, okay, I'm experiencing, let's say for me, I can say, I'm experiencing shame. And then I can be like, but wait, what am I ashamed of? I didn't do anything wrong. And that's when you start to be able to break your own repetitive cycle, your own repetitive pattern. So start to think about that. Start to think about ways it might have impacted you that you might not even realize yet. And like I said in the previous video, it's really important to not deconstruct your entire life, pull it to pieces, question everything. Please, really, this is not my message with the video. It's more to raise awareness. But if you don't think this applies to you, don't worry about it. Stay tuned, because I will be sharing more videos on this topic. So if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe and hit the notifications button so that you get notified when I upload a new video. Thanks for watching.